Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
We are in Season 3. We've reached Episode 12, Par Avion.
It is a Claire episode. It is, in fact, I realized, only the second true Claire flashback on Lost, because last year she had the on-island flashbacks in maternity leave. So this is one of our first additional glimpses into Claire's past in Season 1.
We've also got more from Andrew Divoff, who of course played Mikhail Bakunin. He appears to die in this episode, but of course does not.
Despite a very large amount of blood spurting from his ears. Yeah. Let's get into Par Avion. As always on The Hatch, we start with our hottest takes about the week's episode. Lots of spicy stuff in this episode. What do you want a hot take on, Rosie?
Oh gosh, I feel like it was just a little bit too easy for Kate and Saeed and John Locke to get over the barrier.
Oh, it was clever. They used a tree.
Was it clever?
I don't know.
There's a whole forest right there. I mean, we've seen that this is an extremely frightening and, apparently deadly fence. It's got some incredible sort of sonar technology. But then they, it doesn't extend even like a foot above the fence and they can just like vault over it. I don't know. It just sort of felt like, of course I'm glad they do because it leads to this phenomenal moment at the end where Jack is playing football with the others. But it just seems like it should have been a little bit more difficult.
So I also have a hot take about the fence.
Okay.
I guess it's very hot takeable. But I just thought it was, hilarious, maddening, but hilarious when Kate is just going to, go and walk straight up to the thing when they get there with just no caution whatsoever.
Yeah.
And thank goodness, as always, this is every hot take for us. But for Saeed, who is the only person there with any common sense, it seems, grabbing her and stopping her, is like, no, this seems bad. Maybe don't go near it.
Right.
Saving Kate from frying her brain like happens to Mikhail a few minutes later. So
right.
Go Saeed, wonder what was happening in Kate's head there.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point Kate's got a mission. She's focused on it. She knows they're getting close, and she tends to move with abandon sometimes, I think, when
that's fair. When
she's single-minded like that. But you're right. Thankfully, she's not the one who gets blown over by the fence.
Yes, thankfully it is Mikhail, and I have to say, as much as I love that they keep this character around, because a wonderful character,
right? He
is so dead when he goes through that fence. Saeed says that it looks like he had a cerebral hemorrhage. You don't survive one of those on an island.
Yeah, and you certainly don't survive it and be able to swim and, do all the things he does later, right?
Yeah, it's no complaints, but lots and lots of blood came out of his ears.
Oh dear.
Anywho, lots of stuff. Surprisingly solid episode. I mean, I had forgotten how much good stuff there is.
Oh, so much happens.
The Locke and Saeed fighting, and the twist at the end, and the reveal of Christian Shephard as Claire's father, and I mean, obviously the main storyline with Claire and Charlie and Desmond, which is not even the highlight of the episode, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, I actually think this is one of the better ideas for getting off the island.
Really?
Yeah, I think it makes more sense than the raft.
Go on.
I don't know if it makes more sense. I have no idea how birds work. I don't know if this bird is likely to carry this note all the way to its endpoint. But it seemed like a clever idea. No one is in danger. Well, except Charlie, who's saved by the supernatural grace of Desmond. But I mean, the raft was their only hope with the raft was that we will run into a shipping lane. And
right,
I don't know how many shipping lanes there are, but this
not as many as there are birds.
Equally, if not more likely to succeed and much less dangerous. Anyway, I think one of the interesting themes that is emerging here is that some people want to leave the island and some people do not. And no one has explicitly picked sides yet, but we had, echoes of this last week with John blowing up all the communications equipment. And then, of course, this week it's implied that he knew what he was doing because he knew that the house was rigged with C4. And
yeah, and we talked about that last week, and we weren't sure. And already one of our listeners, Michael Lucero, who's a regular commenter on our Twitter, which is at the Hatch Podcast, if you'd like to go follow us, he pointed that same thing out, that he always thought that, the reveal in this episode that Locke knew that there was C4, not only knew that there was C4 in the flame, but stole some of it. He thought that was a pretty clear, indication looking back at Enter 7-7 that Locke knew what he was doing and is, actively planning here to keep people on the island or to make it harder to get off. And I think that's a good read. I had forgotten, in fact, this scene from Avion when we discussed Enter 7-7 last week.
I had too. I think you're spot on, Michael. And I think it's made pretty explicit in this episode. And then in the other plot line back on the beach, it's Claire tells Charlie, like, you don't want me to do this. Why don't you want me to do this? It seems like you don't want to get off the island. And, that's a bit of a much different case. Charlie just doesn't want to die. But
it's interesting, though, because ultimately the thing that does get Charlie killed is an effort to communicate with the mainland and get off the island. I think there seems to be a thread there of the things that are getting Charlie killed are, the things that are going to get them home. And that's why Charlie sacrifices himself at the end, because he thinks it's going to get Claire home and the baby. That's
an interesting point.
I think your parallel actually works.
Yeah.
Well, and it's building up. The point you made about people is, not quite choosing sides yet, but lo and behold, that's the beginning of next season. Everyone is going to have to choose a side between Camp Jack, get off the island, or Camp Locke, stay and make do.
Right, and I think the reason the twist at the end is so good here is that, the groundwork is being laid for do we stay or do we go, and Jack, who has always been flying the let's get off the island flag, is suddenly playing football with the others. And, it's kind of the opposite of that. And, obviously nothing is made explicit, but that's kind of the undercurrent that I felt there.
Well, except that, as we know, the reason he's playing football with them is because they're good friends, because he's made a deal. They're going to let him get off the island now.
Right.
I was it's a great twist. I was a little bit more jarred by it than I expected, just because, Jack he almost looks like a little kid. He's so happy to be running around throwing a football. Did you notice right at the end, the last thing before it, cuts to, Bam lost,
he goes to spike the football?
Yeah. It's like, how on earth did he get so comfortable with them so fast after everything that's happened? It's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, it's only been 2 weeks since the hatch blew up.
Right, and I checked the timeline on Lostpedia, and it's been like 5 or maybe 6 days since the aborted surgery, or the successful surgery, I should say.
Right. Well, and one moment of levity doesn't necessarily mean that Jack has entirely forgiven these people, but I think it tells us that he's kind of accepted the terms of the deal and is sort of approaching this through fuck it, might as well not be totally miserable while I'm here. But we'll get more into that as we go.
We will. I'm really looking forward to Man from Tallahassee after watching this.
Me too.
I also, as long as we're talking about the events of the sonar fence, the fighting between Sayid and Locke throughout this episode I find to be wonderful.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I think I like it especially because there are things that each of them is right about. Mm-hmm. Like, Sayid is really mad that, Locke complains, are you sure that map that you've got from the flame station is accurate? And Sayid shoots back, and, well, it's more accurate than, how the light hit your stick.
Yeah.
Which is very well deserved. And he's mad at Locke for blowing up the flame, also very well deserved. And lying about it. But at the same time, I think Locke has a very strong point that they should have just killed Mikhail.
And Locke takes that into his own hands.
He does, and I kind of have trouble blaming him for that. It turns out to be a very smart move. It saves them all the trouble of dying themselves. And now they don't have to...
That's one way to put it, yeah.
And now they don't have... And if he had asked Sayid what he thought about that idea, I'm sure Sayid would have told him not to do it. So, I don't know, it's just the back and forth, and there's just such great lines,
Remind me why we're keeping him alive? What do you suggest, we shoot him like a dog? No, I like dogs.
It's gruesome and, dark, but it's fun.
Yeah, you really do see, again, this is just does such a good job of building what was laid last week, but these two very different missions and very different intents, as they go to learn more about the others. And yeah, Locke is starting to seem slightly more, like you mentioned last week that Locke came off as kind of dopey when he was playing the chess game, and you didn't use the word dopey, but,
that's an accurate summation of my feelings.
But here, we get a much more of a suggestion that, Locke actually did know what he was doing, and he had a reason for doing it. And, he's not being a dope. He's doing something. We just don't really know what it is yet.
Right. We're going to find out next week.
Ugh. Yes.
No, you're right. My read on Locke last week turned out to be not a good one.
Well, no, he came off that way.
Yeah.
Just we know more now.
We do. So I'm also curious, we haven't talked much about Claire and Charlie. What did you think of that flashback and about her interactions with Charlie as well?
Yeah, so the flashback, I was really just struck by how young she seemed. Yeah, you find out at the end that she and her mom had been having some stupid fight, and she said she hated her, and it's just very kind of teenage stuff, which makes it much worse, to kind of have to deal with that, I think, when she's so, I was just like, holy crap, I think of Claire as this mother and this slightly sort of more mature person, but she's super young when the events of this flashback were happening. Oh, man. So when Christian Shephard shows up, great holy shit moment for the viewers. But almost the first thing he says to Claire when they finally sit down to talk one-on-one is, hey, you should consider, assisted suicide.
Yeah. And illegal assisted suicide, too.
Right, right. Which is a lot. I get that, I don't know, he's a doctor. He probably thinks what he's saying is reasonable and right, but it super comes off, you can see how it would come off as him being selfish and, not wanting to pay for this woman's life support for many years to come. And
frankly, I don't even
grim.
think it was about the cost, but I just, it seemed to me like it was him thinking he knew better when he had never, when he hadn't been part of her life and hadn't been there. And it was really gross, I thought.
Yeah, it was a gross piece of advice given in a gross way. But yeah, it's this kind of amoral Christian that we've seen before, who just assumes that whatever he thinks is best, he knows best, and that must be the right way to do things.
I will say with Christian that even though it was gross, and even though, he didn't give us, really anything to like about him in that scene, I was slightly, touched by his description of, still, visiting when Claire was a baby and bringing her toys and trying to be part of her life. And, maybe it was a half-hearted effort. We weren't there. We don't know. But I'm sort of trying to take from that he, he wanted to, sort of quote unquote do the right thing, even though there's not a lot of right in this situation to be done. And even after then the, recommendation of assisted suicide, which is very difficult to watch, there was something about his last line in the scene where he says,
"Bye, kiddo. It's great seeing you again."
I don't know, there was something about the way he said, it's great seeing you again, with this little, sort of ironic lift in his voice at the end, where it's he knows it wasn't really great to see her again. It wasn't great for her, it wasn't great for him.
Right.
But he
Terrible
wishes it could have been.
Yeah.
And I felt like there was regret when he said it, and a little bit of tenderness maybe, and I don't know, I wanted to go away from that scene feeling not as bad about him as we probably should.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I question a little bit his claims that he wanted to be involved with Claire and her mother, because we don't know anything about the frequency of the visits. We don't really know. He says he stopped coming because Claire's aunt, the mother's sister, hated him so much. But one of the things he says is that she didn't like that I had a family, like another family.
Right.
And Christian never told his family in Los Angeles about this, did he?
Definitely not.
Jack certainly didn't know.
No, I'm sure he didn't.
I don't imagine that his wife knew. I don't think they would have super enjoyed learning that he had another family either. Doesn't really feel like something we should blame Claire and her mom for.
No.
I don't know. I thought he came off as pretty arrogant.
No, you're right.
throughout.
Christian's a douche. I'm trying to find something nice, but he's a bad
and
guy.
I agree with you in that he did seem like there was part of him that wanted to show affection for Claire, but I think he realizes pretty quick that, like, I don't know this woman, and like I've never been part of her life, and he wants to claim that role, but I think she shuts him down pretty effectively, and I think he accepts that.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not that we get any Claire flashbacks ever again, as I mentioned earlier, but I'm sure this is the last time they see each other. Oh, until the afterlife, they see each other in the church.
Yeah. I don't...
It's sad.
Part of what sucks is that it's so in line with what we already think about Christian Shephard that it's almost unsurprising. Like, it's surprising because we already know this person and he's appearing in a different part of the show, but it's not surprising.
Right, like you take a minute to digest it and you're like, oh, of course he has another family in Australia. Like, that
right.
checks out.
If anyone would, it would be him.
It would. Oh, boy.
Which, to bring this back into present-day island time...
oh, are you going to mention Charlie now?
Soon.
Okay.
This gave me some good perspective, I thought, on why Claire feels so protective of Aaron. And why she gets so mad at Charlie when he does stupid stuff.
Yeah.
Because he hasn't decided if he wants to be Charlie. Oh, Charlie.
He hasn't decided if he wants to be what?
He hasn't decided if he wants to be what he wants his relationship to Aaron to be. Really what he wants is... I mean, he wants to, like, date Claire to whatever equivalent you can date on this island. But, like, then he does shitty stuff. Like he does in this episode.
Yeah, and it's... I know we've been complaining about Charlie a lot, like, basically the entire time we've been doing this podcast, and...
I'm sorry.
I'm kind of... Yeah, I'm sick of it, and I know people don't like it, and I know that also he's trying... I mean, he has a... At least here for once, he has a good reason, like, he's trying to avoid his own death, which he's fairly convinced will happen if he goes along with what Claire wants. However, why not just tell her what's going on?
That's what I was thinking. Like... She can handle it. A lot of crazy shit has happened on this island.
Her baby's been kidnapped. She's been drugged by the others. Yeah.
Instead of coming up with this weird-ass, like, oh, the bird idea is stupid. Like, you don't have to insult Claire to say, like, actually, weird thing going on. Desmond keeps getting visions of my death. Like, I don't know.
No, but when Desmond tells her she's fine, you're right, she could handle it.
Yeah, and she forgives Charlie and says, like, I get why you reacted this way. It's going to be all right. Of course, in the end, you know, unfortunately it is not. But it could also be better if Desmond were, like, not... Everybody is very weird about the circumstances surrounding Charlie, right? Like, Desmond doesn't need to come through and say, like, hey, buddy, wink, wink, maybe we should go boar hunting. I guess he does because Claire doesn't know, but, like...
I actually thought Desmond's trick about running by and shooting the rifle to mess up their plan was kind of hilarious.
1, 2...
What did that do over there, Jana?
Like I said, I'm sorry.
What's wrong with you?
Look, I was shooting at a boar. I had no idea you were out here.
Oh, so it's just a coincidence then. Where is it?
It got away.
Right. I mean, Desmond, he's trying to, you know, help out his buddy, his bro, and, you know, help him pull off this cute date, but also keep him from dying. So
typical bro problems to resolve here.
So yeah, not really typical dude stuff at all, but
no.
Oh dear. Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I have a lot of respect for Claire actually after this episode. Like, she's been through some shit. And she's trying her best, and she's, like, very sincere. You know, she can roll with the punches, which Claire's ending, one of my least favorite endings.
Yeah, her and Saeed really get the short end of the stick at the end of the show.
Yeah, but anyway, do you have any hindsights for this episode?
Yeah, in addition to the various hindsighty things that we've already talked about, I was very relieved to remember, as Claire was talking to her comatose mother at the end and expressing all her regrets, that lo and behold, when everyone makes it off the island later, Claire's mother has recovered and is fully alive and walking around and talking and living a life and interacts with Jack after he gets off the island.
Holy crap, I forgot about that.
I thought you might have, since you didn't bring it up. I had almost forgotten about it, and I was like, I had to double check, like, oh yeah, Carol Littleton, like, she's a whole thing in seasons 5 and 6.
Right. Oh my gosh.
So that made me feel a whole lot better about, all of the regret that Claire feels. Because presumably, although we don't get to see this, but presumably when Claire gets off the island finally at the end of season 6 on the plane, the Ajira plane, she gets to reconcile with her mother.
Right.
And repair that relationship. Which is kind of like, I get goosebumps just thinking about that.
Yeah. Wow, yeah, and to think about how different that would have been if she had listened to Christian.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Ooh, wow. Oh my God, I totally forgot about that. Oh. So I don't have any hindsights. I always bring up my hindsights during the conversation. I really need to stop doing that. But we have gotten some really interesting comments, I think, way back, like 2 weeks ago, from our discussion of Stranger in a Strange Land. So just want to read some stuff that we got on Facebook and Reddit and some other stuff. So this came in on Facebook from Andre Papadinic. Andre says, perhaps a low-ranking episode, but it was necessary to show a different Jack, a traveling Jack, a messed-up Jack. The flash, quote-unquote, backs of the finale that season wouldn't have been so mind-blowing without it. To add, note that most of the season 3 finale's flashes would have worked with his backstory to date, except for the beard and the flight home and the bridge contemplation. Without witnessing the Thailand trip, Jack's attempt at moving on, his anti-characteristic forcefulness with the tattooist, his suicide attempt, oxy and booze addictions, and poor housekeeping and personal hygiene would have been too sudden and too much. The viewer would have been left with 20 minutes to wonder what if that was an epilogue, thereby ruining the surprise. I think that's a really good argument.
It actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people really would have, not bought into the flashback otherwise, but I certainly see the logic of trying to set that up by showing an episode where Jack was, kind of lost and searching and all over the place and crazy.
Right.
Because it does seem like the story in the finale, if it were really a flashback, would kind of follow logically from that. Right.
Right, and I can see the parallels now that I'm thinking about Andre's comment. I've just never thought about it that way before.
It's a smart thought.
Okay, this one comes in from Reddit, from Sensei Lollipop Man, assuming Sensei has a different Earth name. He says, they say, I agree that this episode is pretty rough. It's Thailand, so you're supposed to assume she is a sex worker, and other cultures are mysterious and magical trope is so tired even in 2006. Though I do love that Jack got his ass beat for being a shitty, entitled, drunk American asshole. And I love that his tattoos can be translated as, this white boy is a poser.
Harsh but true.
Yeah, and they expound later. I think one of the hosts, mentioned Jack believing that he's entitled to things he's not entitled to. In Stranger, it's a tattoo because he doesn't value the culture or Ashra's autonomy, in whatever the case may be. Flashing back, it's Kate's past because he doesn't value her privacy. And again, in season 3, he feels entitled to Juliet's private convo with Ben. All of which I think are good points. I had not made those parallels either. I find it irritating that Jack seems only to do this to women, unless my memory is selective. And while he is a subversion of the gallant and capable white male lead by being so hyper-focused on being a fixer, he can't see that when he breaks things, he is very much not a subversion of that trope. And
I think it ends here with Sensei Lollipop Man making an extremely, prescient summation. I can't tell if his character is simply a product of the era before conversations of male entitlement to women became more openly discussed, or if this was intentional by the writers. Honestly, my money is on the former, and I would agree in that case. I think it's almost certainly the former, that this this was just sort of considered a normal way to write a character.
Right. Yeah, no, I think those are all really good points, and I think the parallels to Jack, wanting to fix things to the point that he feels like he needs to sort of take everything into his hands so that he can fix it, rather than just letting people be autonomous is a pretty solid point. Anyway.
One more
Yes.
listener comment, and a bunch of people made this one, including the one we've got noted down here is Robin Kane, who wrote us a note on Facebook. I complained a bunch a couple weeks ago about the meteor hitting Hurley's restaurant in flashback, seeming like it was, beyond, the jumping the shark and beyond belief and kind of insane and out of nowhere. But a bunch of people have pointed out to us that actually way back, Hurley does list a bunch of bad things that happened to him, one of which was a meteor hitting his restaurant. So that was long foretold. I still think it's a silly plot device, but I was wrong that the writers, were throwing that out there at the last minute because they were out of other stuff to do. They had that one in mind. So thank you,
and
Robin.
I still think it's a great cherry on top of the Sunday of bad things that have happened to Hurley. But, agree to disagree. Thank you, Robin.
Disagree. Let's go to our interview.
Yeah. So the man needs no introduction. Andrew Divoff played Mikhail Bakunin. If you have not yet listened to our episode on Enter 7-7, you can hear some absolutely brilliant thoughts from him about how he brought that character to life. Today we're going to get a bit more into the nuts and bolts in terms of his stunt work.
On Lost and on other films and TV shows of which you may be a fan.
Yeah, there's a whole diversion about Air Force One, which is... The title is never mentioned, but that's what they're talking about.
One place where I assume you had input into the character, or perhaps the character just, they added your attributes. He speaks all those languages, and that's you, right? You
Yes.
speak a bajillion languages.
Yes. I speak 8, and I thought it would be really cool and mentioned, and never presumed to step on any idea or to even consider that I might influence it, but I would make suggestions, and I was very, very cautious of making them well ahead of time, so that it could be decided either way, this or that way, whether they were going to do it or not, and so I would always request very politely, may I say this, may I say that, could we include this or that. And it was always well received, and there were a few times, maybe 3, that I would request that, and what may seem minor things, but as you say, yes, to be able to show that this character had a lot of depth, and languages I think do that for a person. As one of my favorite sort of things to reminiscences is that Thomas Jefferson would say, and as a retort to somebody who asked him, well, how can you seem so different when you're in Paris? And his retort was, well, you are as many different people as the languages you speak.
Oh, that's interesting.
Meaning that he had sort of realized that a language is more than just a means of communication. It is actually a cultural sort of a shield, emblem, thing that you wear on your sleeve. So you change. A language changes you with its culture.
How did you end up speaking 8 languages?
It was a chip on my shoulder. I came to the States when I was 10 years old, and apparently I'm told I had an accent. And so,
where did you come from?
From Venezuela.
Okay.
I was born in Venezuela. Lived there till I was 10 years old. My mother is Irish and my father's Russian, and so when we came to the States, they divorced. I came to the States with my mom. Was raised by a single mom. She's one of my heroes, no question. And so I remember a 10-minute conversation with the principal of the school I was to attend, and him looking at my mother and saying, "Well, I'm not sure he comprehends, so we're going to hold him back here." And it was that sort of triggered my obsession with languages. And from that point on, nothing else mattered but languages. And so by the time I was leaving high school, and the thing that got me my D- sort of average so that I could get out of high school was languages. And so I remember in high school taking French, just to get the hell out of high school. You know, and my French teacher also spoke Russian, was a Russian heritage, and she said, "You need to be studying Russian as well." And so I started to get into it. Didn't sort of follow up on that until later when I was in university, in school. And so we moved in 1973. My mother was with the State Department. We ended up in Spain, in Barcelona.
Right.
And so I was at the University of Barcelona, and then transferred my credits to the American College in order to be able to come back to the States and attend Georgetown, where I proceeded to study languages and linguistics in Russian and Russian area studies.
So. Wow. So did the fact that your Russian heritage, did that make any difference when you were, did auditioning for Mikhail, or is that just a coincidence?
As I recall, I included some Russian and minor words, pleasantries in my audition. And so, and made it clear that I did speak other languages. I think by that time, I think they were aware that I had done, for instance, Toy Soldiers and spoke Spanish and that, and had done other roles where I had spoken French and Spanish and German. I remember there was a show, it was called Hooperman. And I'm sort of phasing on his name.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, a little before my time.
No problem. But so anyway, so it was the fact that all those languages were spoken. It couldn't be more of a maelstrom, could it?
No, it couldn't.
How tricky. Thank you for your patience.
Well, no, I think it's nifty that you're able to work sort of yourself into the character. That's not something I would have expected for this character in particular, that the
cool.
attributes were shared with the actor in that way.
That's so cool. That's so cool. I appreciate
so
that.
I watched, over the last couple of days, I watched all of the scenes you appeared in, and I think the thing that struck me the most about the way you played the character is that he's clearly got a code, he's got honor, but he's also there's something a little bit psychopathic about him, I would say. He takes a little bit of pleasure in telling Saeed that he will not hesitate to kill him, and when he blows the grenade at the end, there's like a manic kind of look in his eyes. So was that how you intentional? Was that how you were playing this guy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Again, feeling as Mikhail, feeling that. That even though this exile was self-imposed, feeling that it was forced by others, and that and not forgetting that slight, not forgetting that offense. For instance, when we're sitting, and speaking of Saeed, when we're sitting very much in this orientation, and he tells me that his glee in having killed one of the people on the sailboat.
Right.
And then there's that sort of electric moment where I take a moment very, very purposefully and look up and I say, "Where we continue to play this little game." And so there is that glee, knowing the cat and the mouse, knowing what's about to come, and knowing the cat, knowing that he sort of has the mouse trapped. And not at that time, not being quite sure about Miss Lily and her, and I must say, as an actor, I was so impressed by her.
Evangeline Lilly,
yes,
Kate, yeah.
Yes, and her willingness to do these stunts and her toughness, and at that moment, both as Andrew and as Mikhail, I was sort of, and in the scene, it infers that I was dismissing her. And sort of my attention was on this mouse, and not on that other cat.
Yeah.
So.
Right, but she's obviously able to handle herself quite well.
Absolutely.
You do all your own stunts, right?
I do. What I can do, I do, and I enjoy that, and I feel. And other actors have commented to me, said, "Well, I'm an actor, man. I don't have to do that." But my retort to that is, I'm an actor as well, and I will act as much of the piece as I can. And I believe it's important, especially for the viewer, to be able to see a seamless fight see that it is that character essentially fighting for whether it be his honor, his life, something he believes in, whatever. I think it just dispels the reality of the scene and what's happening within it, to have somebody else step in, and I can't understand how, and to me it's more fascinating that an actor can continue with his thing and in his head and his character, stepping out, letting somebody take over for even a couple of nanoseconds, 2 minutes, whatever, and then step back in and feel as if there's a continuity. I couldn't possibly feel that. I'm not good enough to feel that way.
That's interesting. So when we see you in Lost fighting Jin or fighting Saeed, that's you. I mean, you're
absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.
That's I mean, that makes sense to me intellectually. I just know it's not the thing that most actors do, but I like it.
No, and I mean, I don't know whether it is really or not. Yeah. I can tell you that I've had some wonderful examples of actors who do that. Mr. Harrison Ford being one shining example of it.
Sure.
And I'll just relate to you a story, so my agent calls me and says, Wolfgang Peterson wants to meet you. And I had read for this Boris Bazilev, and I thought, wow, okay, cool. So I'm thinking, well, he must want to amplify the role. That has to be why he wants to speak to me. And can I do Russian? And so I go into the room and shake hands, sit down. He says, and so I'm sort of, we're having a very sort of again, pleasantries, just yes. What do you think? And and have, are you does it scare you or intimidate you at all to be working with or fighting with Harrison Ford in the film? And I said no. But I said, but the character is kind of I'd love to be able to flesh him out a little. And so he looks at me and he says, yeah. So we have a very important fight with Harrison Ford. Do you think you can do it? And I said, yeah. And I'm just not even that. He said, yeah. But I mean, do you think maybe we could I could be more with Mr. Oldman's character? You could see me more, and I could be. And he looks at me and he says, yeah. So we have a very important fight with Harrison Ford. Do you think you can do it? And I realized, he said, shut the fuck up, Andy. I said, yeah. I can do it. And then he says to me, he says, if you hit Harrison, we would close down production, and that's $1 million a day. And I said, and he says, does that intimidate you? And I said, no, it doesn't. And so he wanted to know, and he was putting it right out there. And the odd thing was that, as I found out later, there were a couple of actors who said, yeah, you know what, I'd rather not do the role. Can you fucking imagine that, dude? I can't.
Backing out of that role because you're afraid you're going to hit Harrison Ford.
I can't imagine that. I must say he was such a gentleman. As you know, a scene will start wide and come in and sometimes leapfrog the actor to be within now and it's just the actor close up and so forth. And at that moment, Harrison was literally off screen, giving me eye contact and making sure that my eye line was correct to faithful to the rest of the scene, and he was literally cheering, "That's it, Andy! Throw another one! Throw that right!" It was absolutely wonderful, and I'm thinking to myself while I'm doing this, I'm thinking, this is Harrison Ford directing me.
That's amazing.
And telling me what a great job I'm doing. I mean, what a wonderful day that was, and what a wonderful thing. Again, I'll go back to it. It is for an actor to be able to seamlessly be in a scene that involves physicality.
So to bring it back to Mikhail, why do you think he was... Did you have... It sounds like you sort of had some backstory for the character in your head. You were thinking pretty hard about why he was who he was. Why do you think he was so loyal to Ben and to the island? Where did that come from?
I think ultimately, going back to my audition, I think ultimately there is that code. And whether it behooved him or not to do something, whether it means ultimately that his demise it is still sticking to the code and to his honor. I will tell you a little story about my grandfather. My grandfather was a general in the White Russian Army,
right?
And he was so he stayed and he fought. My grandmother took my father and went to Harbin, China. My father's uncle, General Horvat, was also in the White Russian Army, and he was responsible for engineering the Trans-Siberian Railway,
wow,
the Orient Express. And it was because of that good fortune, that my grandmother was able to escape to that mansion that was essentially a mile on both sides of the tracks, was ceded to my great uncle, my father's uncle.
In China?
Manchuria.
In
Manchuria. And the deal was, as long as you take care of the railway, make sure it runs, this is your place, your estate. They escaped there, and the only thing that was available, that was empty, were the servants' quarters. And my father telling me every day he would go out, and there was this dead wood in a tree, throw a rope with a stone on it, pull some dead wood out, and that would be the fire for that day's cooking. His father stayed and fought, and at the end of the revolution, the October Revolution, he refused to take his uniform off.
Huh.
And every day these group of Bolsheviki would come through in trucks looking for the stragglers, looking for any leftovers to kill them, to get rid of them. And they came upon my grandfather. And every day they would beat the crap out of him, and they tell him, if we find you tomorrow wearing this uniform, we're going to kill you. And so the next day, my grandfather would go out in the uniform, bedecked with his medals, and walk and do his promenade. And again, they would stop, and ultimately, they tore his uniform off and carved his medals into his chest.
Oof.
And the very next day, he put his uniform back on and went out again. And then these guys in the truck came up, saw him, and the leader of that gang said, "You leave this man alone. This man you leave alone." And it was that honor, it was that sticking to a code that I tried to infuse Mikhail with, and I never forgot that story. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I think that when I was listening to and editing this interview, this is the point where I texted you and said, "This is the most metal thing I've ever heard."
That is probably the point at which you texted that, yes.
Oh my gosh. Andrew Divoff has led an absolutely astounding life.
Yeah, man, he speaks 8 languages, and he, is just like quoting Thomas Jefferson casually in our interview, and
right.
Born in Venezuela to an Irish mother and a Russian father, and the stuff with his grandpa in the army, like,
oh my goodness.
I don't know. He's the whole package.
Incredible.
He gets called back very briefly in season 6, and I think I asked him about this later in the interview, so we'll get to it. But he gets called back very briefly as an interpreter working on behalf of Martin Keamy in The Flash Sideways. So it's the Lost's 2 greatest psychopaths. We'll get to see them together later.
Oh. Boy.
Anyway, we will be back next week. We will have season 3, episode 13, The Man from Tallahassee, in which Locke blows some more shit up, which is going to be real fun.
And we find out how he broke his back and how he lost his legs, right?
Yes, a mystery that by this point in the show many of us had forgotten, that was never resolved.
We will have quite a bit to talk about with the episode next week, plus we will have even more from Andrew Divoff.
As always, you can find us on social media, Twitter at The Hatch Podcast, Facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast. Send us messages. Tell us what you think of the point in the show that we're at, or disagree with our opinions, and maybe we'll read them like we did this week.
If you would like to call and leave us a hot take with your voice, you can reach us at 9546-DHARMA. It's a U.S. number, so add a +1 if you're out of the country.
As always, many thanks to Andy G. Cohen, who does our theme music, and Danny Roth, who did our cover art.
Talk to you next week.
Namaste.